Good morning, students of the Savannah-Chatham County Public School System. The Savannah Book Festival is honored to have you join us for our SBF at Schools event. My name is Tara Setter, and I have the distinct pleasure of introducing you to the award-winning New York Times bestselling author James Ponti. At the end of our time with you, James will have a chance to answer some of your questions. For the students at home, you can submit a question by clicking on the Q&A icon at the bottom of your screen. For the students that are in classrooms, we're going to have the teacher use the raise a hand function. Then we will call on you and you'll have the opportunity to ask your question live to James. James was born in Italy. He grew up in Florida, 2 blocks from the ocean. During college, he worked at Walt Disney World on the Davy Crockett Explorer canoes. He says his joke telling in this job helped develop James into a writer. After going to college in California, he began writing and producing television shows for Nickelodeon, the Disney Channel, and others. James loves writing, travel, the Boston Red Sox, and he lives in Orlando, Florida with his awesome family. Thanks to a grant from the city of Savannah, you've all received a copy of James' latest book, City Spies, Golden Gate. I think you're really going to enjoy the book. Now, let's meet the man that wrote it. Please welcome James Ponti.
Hi everyone. It's so great to see you today. I so wish I was there in Savannah, which is a favorite place of mine. I grew up in Jacksonville, so it's not too far down the coast. One of the things, so this is new technology for a lot of us, even though we've been playing with it all year at school. So we may have some hiccups along the way. One thing I would ask right now is everyone, if you could make sure that your microphones are muted, and also let's not do too much craziness in the chat, while we're talking, but we want to have a good time because books should be fun and it should be good. And I want to talk to you about writing the books that I write, and writing books in general. A lot of my friends are some of the biggest writers you would know. And we actually, I have a group that every Tuesday night gets together and talks on Zoom. It's an amazing group of, it's Gordon Foreman and Stuart Gibbs and Christina Sue Tornbot and all these great authors, and Max Brallier, who writes Last Kids on Earth. And we talk about everything, and we're all lately been talking about when are we ever going to get to go back to visit schools again, because we really miss that. So I'm going to share with you, if I can figure out how to do this right, a little bit, and we will see. Does this work? All right, that looks like that's working. So people wonder, what's it like to write spy books? What's it right? Because the books that I write now are mostly spy books. So I'll give you, to get the mood, we will get the music playing, and we will talk about what it's like to write a spy book. Now, reality is different for different people. This is what it feels like to me. Yeah, I'm just traveling around the world with celebrities, exotic locations. Here I am with Agent Kevin Hart in New York last year, and actually the year before last, having a good time. This is what it actually looks like, just Goofy hanging out with the Peanuts gang. It was really depressing to find out my celebrity double is Charlie Brown. And this is what it feels like. Yes, I am always late with my homework, just like you are. I'm always stressed, and what am I going to do? How am I going to get it done? I'm talking to you today from Orlando, Florida. This is the office where I write the books. This is the computer that I write the books on, that is now the computer that I'm talking to you through. So you are in the least exciting place on earth. Writing a book is not particularly exciting to look at, but it is certainly fun to do. The books that I've written 3 book series. We'll talk about them in a little bit, but the series I'm writing right now is City Spies. The first book is called City Spies. The second book, the one that I believe all of you have, or most of you have, is City Spies Golden Gate. And you probably haven't had a chance to read it or find out much about it. So I am going to show you a little trailer to introduce you to the book.
Can they stop a hijacking in the North Sea? Break into one of the most famous libraries in the world? Outsmart an evil villain chasing them through Alcatraz? These are just some of the questions that face the city's spies. 5 kids from around the globe. A hacker, a magician, a code breaker, a rebel, and a genius. Operating out of a secret location in the north of Scotland, they're the biggest secret in British intelligence. In their first adventure, they went to Paris to match wits with a criminal mastermind determined to release a deadly virus. Now they're back and tracking a double agent across the globe. As they travel from London to San Francisco, they have to risk it all to solve the mystery and save the day. City Spies and Golden Gate. From New York Times bestselling author James Ponti.
All right, so that is a hint of the book, but I don't want to look behind the book. I want you to think about what it's like to be a writer. Not that you want to become one, but the writer's brain is different, and the skills and the way that we look at the world is sometimes a good way to look at it for everyone. But this is kind of the way a writer will approach the day and look at the world. And the first thing to think about is that every person is a character. Now, by that, I mean, normally in our life, when we see people, we think of them as the thing that we see them as for us. So this person is my teacher. This person is my neighbor. This person is the bus driver or the deli counter worker or baseball player that I watch on TV or football player, right? And that's the way we look at life, and that's fine. That's what everyone does. But when you're a writer, you have to remember that all of those people are complete people beyond the world that you see. They have things they're good at, things they're bad at. They have things that scare them. They have maybe stories that are sad, stories that are happy. Maybe some of them are about to become parents. Maybe some of them have done heroic things that we would never know about because they don't go around every day saying, oh, one day I saved this kid's life or I did this amazing thing. But a writer needs to start looking and wondering about that. You need to look at people and you need to think about what's their story. That's why when I meet people, I ask a lot of questions. When this started, one of the teachers was online and we were on a little bit early. And so I just wanted to ask questions. I wanted to find out what she does in her classroom and what her classroom's like, because that helps me as a reader, but it helps me as a person. It helps me as a person to remember that we all have these things that we go through. One of the things that I do is, and I'm not always great at this, but I always try to I always try to think of everyone as a member of my family. And by that, I mean, if I'm at the store and the cashier's having a hard time or making a mistake, that doesn't get me frustrated. I try to think of, well, what if that's my son? I would want people to not be frustrated with him. So I want to not be frustrated. So you need to think of every person as a character. And the fun part of that is you can imagine amazing stories for these characters. Now, if every person is a character, the next step is that every place is a setting. And this is true of everywhere. And by setting, I mean it's a place where a story takes place. Now, this is a picture of my son. And when I saw it, it looked like it belonged in a movie. So I took a quick picture. If you've ever seen the movie Hugo, or read the book, The Adventures of Hugo Cabret, this is the clock from that movie on the other side. But it doesn't have to look like it belongs in the movie to be a setting. The sidewalk in front of your school is a setting. Your bedroom is a setting. The McDonald's is a setting. I mean, every place you go, the library is a great setting. And so imagine the stories that could take place someplace. I joke with my wife, I can never drive by a bank without imagining how to rob the bank, which is really not a good way to look at life. But, I write mysteries and I have stories about people doing things. And so it's like, oh, well, you could go into that window, or, oh, you could use that truck, or who knows how. So every person is a character and every place is a setting. And what that means is that every picture tells a story. And that could be a photograph like this, or that can be the picture in your brain as you just look at something. It tells a story. Now, the story of this picture you're seeing right here is the story of how I wrote City Spies. And I will tell you that in a minute, but I wanted to do a little teaser of that. And then I want to ask you an important question. What's your story? And this is the greatest thing about writing to me. All that matters is your story, right? The books that I write, hopefully you like them. Hopefully they're good, but I know there could be better books or there are other books or whatever. If I didn't write them, there would be other books that would take their place in the bookshelf and nobody would notice them missing. But I'm the only one that can write them. And that part is great. My books only exist because of me. That's the story that's in my head. Those are the things that matter to me, told in the voice that I have. And that's great for all of us. All of us have that. One of the things that I love about sports is no one's on a basketball team because they're someone's cousin or son or nephew, or because they have a lot of money. So they went to the Lakers and said, here, I want to be on the Lakers. Here's a lot of money. Put me in the Lakers. Sports are fair. They're fair for everyone. And that's why people come from all over. What you're measured on is what you do. And in sports, it's kind of obvious, but it's true in creative things too, like writing. They're not going to publish a book just because you know the editor, right? You have to write something worth it. So if you look at the history of writing and books and stories, storytellers come from all over. One of the greatest writers in American history is named Flannery O'Connor. He's from Savannah. Not from, you don't have to go to New York and go to a fancy school and live right there in the heart of the publishing district. You can be from anywhere, right? So writers come from anywhere and everywhere. So it really matters is what your story is, and your story is so unique. And people are realizing this more and more now, that we want your personal story. What are the struggles that you do? That doesn't mean you're writing autobiography. Believe it or not, my thing, all the stuff that I wrestled with in middle school, I write about in these books about spies, even though, of course, I was never a spy. Or at least I have to say that. Wink, wink. All right. So I will tell you some of my story. I was born in Italy. I grew up in Florida, in a town called Atlantic Beach. If you were to ask my elementary school teachers, they would say that I was creative. Although actually yesterday I found my elementary school report card. Not as good as I remembered. If you were to look, teachers would say I was creative, that I like to write. I used to draw maps, make up different countries. The things that I like, I love the movies. I like going to school. I love playing basketball and soccer. What I dislike, I hated reading. I absolutely hated reading. And people think it's strange that I write books, and we'll talk about how that came to be. All right. Every picture tells a story. Well, here's the story of my family. So this is my mom and my brothers and me. And 9 years ago, my mother passed away, and it was sad, but she'd been sick for a while, and it was okay. So I had a whole bunch of emotions that week. And I came across this picture, which I have a copy somewhere, but I was sorting through my mom's stuff, and I came across this picture, and this picture made me feel great, and it made me laugh. And it's because this picture tells great stories. So when I say every picture tells a story, I'll give you an idea what I mean. So the first story is what's missing, right? So what's missing from this picture is a father. So I never knew my father. He was gone by the time I was 2. My brothers have a different father, have a different last name. They didn't really know their father. He was gone by the time the oldest one was 6. My mom was good at a lot of things, but marrying good guys was not one of the things she was great at. And so we grew up in this family that was all these boys and this mother who was an artist and sometimes taught art, and no one really knew what to make of us. And we had no money, and she didn't always have a job. And I think people thought, what are those guys? What are they going to do? But my mom had vision, right? She had an idea of what we could become. And that idea is evident by one thing in this picture. So my brothers, I'm the baby in the picture. My brothers are wearing sweaters. So if I was in Savannah, like I wish I was, and we were in person, which would be much more fun, I would ask you, why are my brothers wearing sweaters? And because you're smart, you would all say, because it's cold or cool or whatever. And I would say, yes, that is true for 7 billion people on this planet, but not for my mother. The temperature had nothing to do with the sweaters with my mother. And that's because my mother, no one in my family, in fact, had ever been to college before, right? College was a foreign thing. And my mother was determined that that would make the difference for us, that college would make the difference for a life that was better than the life that she grew up in and whatever. But she didn't know what college was like because she had never been. But once she was in Boston and she was waiting for a friend and she was sitting on a bench and she waited for like half an hour. And every boy that walked past, and she was right by Boston University. So she was right on the edge of the campus. And every boy that walked by with books was wearing a sweater. And so my mom got it into her head that college boys wear sweaters. So and we would tell her, we'd say, Mom, it was because it was Boston, it was cool, there was a reason they were wearing sweaters, and it wasn't because they're in college, but she would have nothing to do with that. So whenever we took pictures, no matter what, and this is Florida in the summer, this is like 95 degrees out, we would have to wear sweaters because my mom thought it made us look like we were going to go to college. And so, and I looked at this picture after, and I realized she had no idea of knowing then that she would be right, that we all would go to college, that my brother went to Notre Dame, and I went to the University of Southern California, my other brother went to the University of Florida, and we all majored in these really neat things, and we all have really interesting, fun careers. But at this time, we just had sweaters, right? So that's one thing. So that part of looking at the picture and thinking about those sweaters made me laugh, but also made me proud of my mom. But the most notable thing about this photograph, the real story, is in the haircuts. Although you can't really call them haircuts because they're like, it's more like butchering. Like the stuff that happened to the hair in this family is just embarrassingly bad. So we'll look at my brother Carrie. Carrie is the one who has a tie on. And Carrie's hair, if you notice, it goes up and then it comes down and then it goes back up again and then it comes down and then back up and down. It is all over the place. And can't really call it a haircut, but if you've ever looked at the map of Australia, you'll see that my brother's hair and the southern coast of Australia are almost identical, right? So I don't know if that was intentional or not, but we have that. And my other brother's hair, well, it looks a lot like the mask on Batman, right? And my hair, I think it's pretty obvious that I look a lot like George Clooney even today. So I had that kind of George Clooney look. But this was because, like I said, we didn't have money. And so my mom would never let us go get our haircut at a barbershop, which was only like $4 or $5. My mom cut our hair for us. And this was the most embarrassing thing, going to school with these ridiculous haircuts. But now they make me laugh. And so I look at this picture and I laugh because this picture that looks like at first that it's just a picture of a mom and 3 sons, to me is the picture of hopes and dreams of college. It's the picture of struggles financially that were overcome and all kinds of things like that. All right, this is where I went to school. This is Atlantic Beach Elementary School. And like I said, it's just outside of Jacksonville. And this is my first grade class. You can pick me out because I'm wearing a sweater, right? Because it's picture day, so you got to wear a sweater. And this is my friend Mary Kay. And Mary Kay and I sat at the same table growing up. And I was super jealous of her because this would happen. Mary Kay would get a book. Maybe she would get a book like from the Mixed Up Files of Miss Paisley Frankwater, and I would get a book, and we would start to read. And in my head, I would read super careful, super slow, and I would go like this. Claudia knew that she could never pull off and I'd have no rhythm and no up and down and no emotion. I would read like I got a hammer and I was just breaking through a wall. That's the only way that I could read. And Mary Kay would sit across the table from me and she would just turn the pages. And I thought she lost. And I realized, no, she's just a super fast reader. She'd look at this and like a robot, and she'd go down to the bottom of the page, and she'd go down to the bottom of the page. And I couldn't understand how she could read so fast, but I was incredibly jealous of her. And in school, we had this thing, which was we had a poster on the wall, and on the poster was everyone's name. And every time you read a book, you got a star. And every time you got a star, you put it next to your name. And on Mondays, we'd come back from the weekend, and Miss Brooks, the teacher, would ask you, go, well, who read a book who read a book this weekend? And Mary Kay would always raise her hand. Oh, I read A Wrinkle in Time. Oh, I read James and the Giant Peach. Oh, I read 2 books of The Little House on the Prairie. And she'd keep getting stars. Well, here's a star, Mary Kay, go put on the poster. And by the end of the school year, I went over and I looked at the poster, and Mary Kay's line was so long. It looked like NASA sent a telescope into space and took a picture of all the stars in the galaxy. It was just unbelievable. And my line looked like the flag of Texas. Texas is called the Lone Star State because it just has one lone star on its flag. I had only read 1 book the whole year, and Mary Kay had read dozens and dozens of books. And I was really jealous, and I was really embarrassed. And so I stopped reading. I decided I'm not going to read anymore. There's no fun to this. This is just embarrassing. And so I barely read for the next 15 years. And it's the one regret of my life. It's the one thing that I wish that I had done differently. If I could go back and I could travel in time and take me and say, hey, pay attention, it would have been, hey, keep reading. Because reading gives us so much. Reading takes us places. Like, it's been so great during COVID. And now I do love to read, right? But it's been so great that we're trapped and we can't go out, we can't travel around. But in books, we can go anywhere, right? And we can meet and find out about other people. You know, one of the problems that we have right now is that a lot of people don't want to know about other people, but you meet and you find different ways of thinking and different ways of being, and it's really, really fun. So how did I become a writer if I wasn't a reader? Well, a lot of it took place in this hallway right here. So at Atlanta Beach Elementary School, this was the 5th grade hallway. And that door, room 123, that was the room that belonged to Mr. Prothero. And Mr. Prothero was the only man who spoke at my school, who taught at my school. The only one. He taught 5th grade, and we worshiped him. You know, from 3rd grade on, you just would watch for him in the hall. He was tall, right? And he had his afro, and that made him taller. And he had these platform shoes because of the 1970s, and that made him taller. And we would just walk down the hall like, you know, lumbering and dopey, you know. And he would strut down the hall. He had swagger, and he had this great mustache, and we all wanted to be him. He was our hero. He was our role model. He was our spirit animal. He was everything. And we wanted to be just like Mr. Prothero, you know, and like at 3rd grade, you'd be sitting there real quiet in the hall, and Mr. Prothero would walk by, and maybe he'd notice you, go, Mr. James, how's it going today? And I'm like, oh, he knows my name. Like, I'm only in the 3rd grade, and he already knows my name. How great is that? And I wanted to be in his class so badly, and unfortunately, I was. In 5th grade, Mr. Prothero was my teacher. He was my teacher for homeroom, which the way we did it was most of the day, and he was my teacher for language arts. So the only time I wasn't in room 123 in 5th grade was the 1 hour a day I was in math class right next door. And I thought, this is going to be it. We're going to learn all the things from him that the women teachers haven't taught us. We're going to learn how to talk in a deep voice. We're going to learn how to strut down the hall. We are going to learn how to grow mustaches, right? I was convinced I was going to have a mustache by the end of 5th grade. This is going to be fantastic. We didn't learn any of those things. Very disappointing. But one day he says, all right, class, this is it. It's my favorite unit of the year. You're going to love the next 2 weeks and what we're going to study. And I'm thinking, maybe this is the mustache class or something like that. Something really different and exciting. Something that's going to change my life. And then he said, we're going to learn all about, here it comes, poetry. Oh, I was devastated. How unfair is this? Poetry. I have waited years for this. And this is the life-changing thing, right? And it's poetry. But the amazing thing, it changed my life. It really did. The first poem he read was Annabelle Lee by Edgar Allan Poe. Annabelle Lee lived in the kingdom by the sea. And the way he said it was that great voice of his. He was in the church choir. And it just sounded like music. And he goes, what do you think he means by that? What's the kingdom by the sea? And I'm sitting there and I'm like, I raise my hand. I go, is it the beach? Does she live by the beach? And he goes, yes. And we lived by the beach. And all of a sudden, our little town, Atlantic Beach, was the kingdom by the sea. And how much better does that sound as your address? 319 First Street, Kingdom by the Sea, Florida. All of a sudden, this is good. He said, now it's important to remember that when you read poetry, you've got to read it really slow. And I'm sitting there going, I read everything really slow. That's not a problem. And he said, and when you read poetry, you've got to say each word carefully in your head so you can hear the rhythm and the meter. And I'm like, I read everything carefully in my head. I don't know any other way. And so poetry was perfect for me. But best of all, poems were short. I could keep up. It didn't matter. It wasn't like a book where now I'm a page behind. Now I'm 2 pages behind. Now I'm 10 pages behind. Poetry is all on a page usually, or 2 pages at the most. I could keep up. I could catch up. So it was great. For 2 weeks, language arts was nothing but fun for me. I loved it. Then one day he said, all right, everyone, we've been studying poetry. Now it's time for you to write your own poems. So I wrote a poem called Stars. I really liked it. I really was happy with it. And he came by and he collected it. And I thought, I hope he likes it. I hope he writes it. A great job, really good, blah, blah, blah. And then he said the worst thing ever. He said, I'm now going to read your poems out loud. I'm like, oh, no. This can't be good. You can't read it out loud. What if my poem's no good? Or what if it's silly or worse? What if I think it rhymes, but it doesn't rhyme because I mispronounce words a lot? And so maybe everyone's going to laugh at me when you read my poem. But there was no stopping him. He had this stack of poems and he was going to go up there. But before he read them, he held up another stack of poems. Another stack of papers. He said, these are some of the greatest poems ever written. And this is what I'm going to do, is I'm going to take your stack, I'm going to take this stack, and I'm going to shuffle them all together. And I'm going to put them on my desk, on my podium that you can't see. So you won't be able to tell what stack the poem came from. And I'm going to read it, and you have to guess who wrote it. You have to figure out as a class who the poet is. So I read the first one. Whose woods these are, I think I know. His house is in the village, though. He will not see me stopping here to watch these woods fill up with snow. Well, there was a couple dead giveaways in that. First of all, it was really good. No 5th grader wrote that. Second of all, it was about snow, and we lived in Florida. None of us knew that. So we knew that was not written by one of us. But we didn't know who wrote it. So we just guessed the pictures of the poets whose pictures were on the wall. Emily Dickinson? No. Walt Whitman? No. Robert Frost? Yes. Robert Frost. Then he read the next poem. It was not quite as artistic. My name is Pat. I own a cat. It's really fat. How about that, right? Okay, so this now is a little bit easier to identify. That's not Walt Whitman. That's a kid in 5th grade, and it's probably a kid named Pat, and we've got Pat Bell in class. I think Pat Bell actually may live in Savannah. So if you're Pat Bell's nephew, niece, son, whatever, I apologize for picking on Pat here. It's just random memory. And we guessed Pat, and I was right. And he kept going through the stack of poems. And then he got to my poem. And he read it. And he said, who wrote that? Who wrote Stars? And a girl raised her hand and answered Shakespeare. And it's the only time someone guessed a real poet for one of our poems. And he smiled and told them it was me. And then he looked at me, and I will never forget the exact words that he said. James, someone thought something you wrote was written by the greatest writer in history. How does that make you feel? It was in that classroom, 123 in Atlantic Beach, Florida, on Sherry Drive. In 1976, 45 years ago. I am so old. And how can I remember something that happened 45 years ago so clearly? It's because that's the moment I decided to become a writer. And I have spent the last 45 years trying to feel like that again as often as I could, because it made me feel great. It made me feel special. It made me feel for the first time like I knew what I was doing. And I just want to feel that way again and again. And so that led me to writing. But what was I going to write? Because there's not a lot of poets other than Amanda Gorman, who's amazing. There's not a lot of poets out there that people have heard. And, books, I'm not going to write books. I can't read books. But we didn't have air conditioning until I was 13 years old. I lived in Florida. It was hot, but I lived close to a movie theater. And so from a young age, my mom would let me, a younger age than would now be considered appropriate, my mom let me go to the movies by myself. And I loved it because the movies are so cold. And if you went to the first movie of the day and the air conditioner had been on all night and you got a Coke and you got your popcorn and you sat in the front row and you couldn't see anyone else, even if anyone else was there that earlier, it was like that movie was just for you. And it was so chilly in there and toasty in there, or cool in there. And I would eat my popcorn, I'd drink my Coke, and I'd watch the movie. And if I liked it, because I had nothing else to do, right? I'm a kid in the summertime. I would sit and I'd watch it again. I'd watch it back to back times. But the funniest thing happened totally unexpectedly, because I knew how the movie turned out, having just watched it. The second time was totally different experience. And I started understanding how the movie was made, because I could see, the storytelling techniques that were used, since I know how it was going to turn out. I could see little clues that were dropped in and little hints that were given and reasons why they did this. And, she's left-handed. We just heard that she's left-handed here. It doesn't seem important. But later, it's going to be so important. And then in middle school, I had a teacher, like some of you have, like Miss Wells' class had. I had a teacher who taught us how to make movies, and we made movies in class, and I fell in love with it. And I wrote the movie every year. And I told my teacher, this is what I want to do. I want to write movies or plays or TV shows. And out of nowhere, without a thought, he just says, James, write a play and we'll produce it. And I, what? He goes, if you write a play, we'll produce it for the school. Didn't ask permission, didn't give a thought. And so I went and I wrote the worst Christmas play in history. I mean, it's terrible. It's Santa's sleigh being taken hostage by terrorists, and everything about it would not be allowed in schools now. It was Christmas, there were guns, there was all kinds of stuff. And it was silly comedy, but I sat there all day after my classmates learned it. I memorized it, and we built the sets, and then every day, kids would come, or all day long, kids would come into the cafeteria where we had the auditorium, and they'd watch and they'd laugh at my silly stuff. And I was hooked. It was that feeling again. So I went to college and I majored in screenwriting. And I started working in television. I worked on the Mickey Mouse Club for Disney Channel. Then I wrote for Nickelodeon and PBS. And I was a TV writer. And then somewhere along the way, I thought I might try writing books, because it turned out when I finally gave it a try, I loved reading books. So the first book series I wrote was called Dead City. It's about a girl named Molly who's recruited to the Omegas, which is the secret society that police the zombies who live underneath New York. The next series I wrote was called Framed, and it's about a boy who's kind of like a young Sherlock Holmes, lives in Washington. And then this got back to this picture. So, as I told you, this is the picture that tells the story of the current set. This is my wife, my son, and I in front of Buckingham Palace in London. That's where the Queen lives, right? And when I finished this book, Vanished is the second book in the Frame series, the day I turned it in, so the first draft that I turned in, the day I turned it in at 6 o'clock in the evening. At 8 o'clock, we were driving to the airport. 9 o'clock, we were on a plane to London, because my son was going to school in England. And my wife had never been to Europe, and we'd never vacationed. We wanted to go on a vacation to visit our son. We missed him. And it was her spring break, and we were able to we had a week to go. And so here I am, less than 24 hours after I finished writing Vanished. I'm at Buckingham Palace, and we're having a great time. Now, the problem is a writer is always writing. And I had just turned in a book, which meant I had to stop writing the story that I had been writing for the last 8 months, because I couldn't do anything to it until after my editor said what she wanted changed. So I started writing the next book. And we're having so much fun in London. I started thinking, well, maybe book 3 of Frame, maybe they'll come to London. And then a couple of days later, we were in Paris, and it's great. And I'm thinking, well, maybe instead of the kids from Frame coming to Europe, maybe I need to write a whole new series that takes place in Europe. And this trip became this book. It's called City Spies. And this trip became this book, which you have in front of you. and it's about 5 kids from around the world. And what they've done is they've all fallen through the cracks of the different cultures where they live, different societies. And they've all been adopted by a spy from England, British spy, MI6. And he doesn't know better. He doesn't know different. So he raises them to be a family of spies. And MI6, which is like the British version of the CIA, what they do is they send them on missions where adults would stand out. And so that's what the stories become. Now, the trick of it for me, the idea that I had that I told my wife about the first night I'm thinking of the story is I wanted kids from around the world. I wanted all, each from a different continent. And the way we keep track of them is their code names, their spy names would be the cities that they were from. And so they're all use the names of cities, and I will introduce them to you.
Oh, that was it.
So the city spies, there's Brooklyn, who is my computer hacker. There is Paris, who's my genius. Sydney is the rebel. Rio is a magician. And Kat is from Kathmandu, and she is great at math and code breaking. And they are the city spies. And I am James, and it is my thrill and honor to be here to talk with you. So we have about 15, 20 minutes to answer questions. I know there are some hands up. So we can do this however you would like.
James, I have written some of the questions that were submitted down. Do you want me to read them to you?
Oh, sure, that would be great.
Okay. First one is, what inspired you to write this book?
Well, you know, I like writing books about smart people and or kids who use their brains. They're not necessarily particularly smarter than other kids. And I like adventure and I like humor. So those were all things in there. I love mystery books, I love spy books, and I love spy movies and mystery movies and TV shows. So it all seemed to be an area that I like to write. But the thing that I really wanted to write about is family. So I told you earlier, I had, a situation where my brothers have a different father and I have a different last name, and we're all, is like, I like the idea of families that are not traditional families, but that are families in every bit of the world, because I feel like that's the world that we live in now. And that it's important for, and when I was growing up especially, it was a different thing. It was like, a very traditional idea of what a family was. And I felt like an outsider sometimes with that, a lot of times that. And I want to celebrate the fact that I think a family is a group that works together and loves each other, right? And so I wanted to write it. And so Spies, a family of spies became the solution for that.
Well, the next one is City Spies a series or just one book you have written?
So City Spies is, so this is the first one. This is the second one. Do I have it around here somewhere? Oh, here it is. This is the third one right now. It's just, there's a copy here in my office, and there's a copy in my editor's office, and we're doing the rewrites and the notes. I just finished writing this about a month ago, this part. And so that's the third one. And as soon as I'm done with that, I'm writing the fourth one.
Oh, okay. Because the next question was, when is your next book?
So this one comes out on in February, this upcoming February,
Okay.
and the next one will be February or March of the next year. Yeah,
Okay.
it'll be every spring for as long as you all keep reading them.
How long does it usually take you to write a book?
It takes about it's hard to say because up until this book I just wrote, I always had a regular job and wrote at night and on the weekends, which kind of messes the timing up. But it normally would take about 9 months. This one took about seven or eight, and I think that maybe not even quite that much. I will soon get into a rhythm, I think, of 2 books a year, so 5 to 6 months a book is what I plan to do. Because I want to have 2 series going at once, is the idea.
Ah, okay.
Yeah.
And what is the most challenging part about writing your books?
Challenging part, so much of it is, I think the challenging part is when you start, like, will I be able to come up with 300 pages, although the last 2 have been over 400 pages, pages of story? Will it all make sense? Will I be able to come up with a mystery? So the challenge is, can you do it? But that's also the most fun part. Because I've done it enough now. I've written 8 books, 9 books, that I know how to do it. So then it's like, okay, now let's see where this one goes. And I don't know when I'm starting what it's going to be. I don't have a big giant plan of this is what it's going to be here, and I'm going to do. I kind of have to find my way, and so that's both, like I said, challenging and fun. Okay.
How does it feel to know that thousands, if not millions, of people, all ages, adore the stories and characters you have created?
If there are hundreds, I'm thrilled. I don't know that
I'm sure it's more than that.
It is the most unusual feeling for me that I have. Is, the strange part of this is I write about the things that matter to me, that are really personal to me. And if you read that book, if you read one of my books, it's like we're friends, because I have now shared my secrets with you. You may not realize that, but it's like we're friends. You know so much about me, but I don't ever meet you. Now you do get to meet some, but for the most part, and so you don't know. It just goes out there and it disappears. And what's really amazing every now and then is I'll meet someone and they'll say, "Oh, I've read your books." They're usually kids. I'm like, "What?" And they go, "I've read all," and they'll know so much. They'll know more about it than I do. There's a girl down the street. I just moved in a little over a year ago, and there's these 3 sisters down the street, and they have read all my books before I moved here. And they couldn't believe, and I couldn't believe that someone who I didn't know, who felt obligated, like my son doesn't even read my books, but that was a strange.
Yeah.
So it is a neat and wonderful thing.
Okay.
Yeah.
How do you think your mom would react, and what would she say now, knowing that you've written books and gone to college?
My mom loved writing, and she wanted nothing more than for me to be a writer. So that part is great. When she passed away, I sorted through her papers. I found rejection letters from publishers that she had tried to send in. So I know it would have meant a lot to her. So actually one of the very last conversations we had, and in the end, she had cancer, she had brain cancer, and she couldn't remember things. She couldn't remember me. But one of the last conversations we had where she was able to keep up and make sense of was I showed her the advanced copy of my first book. And she was so happy. And she rubbed it against her face, I'll never forget, and just smiled. And so she would love it. And one of the things I really regret, so I made the New York Times bestseller was for the first time last year, which was a huge deal. It was a huge deal. And I wished I could tell her and my English teacher in 11th grade, both have passed away. And for both of them, it would have meant more to them than it meant to me, and it meant a lot to me. So that she would love that. She would love it. But she knew that's where I was headed. And she liked to. She was around when I was writing television, And she loved that. She thought that was fun. I'd
Yeah.
go down to the set and I'd let her walk and I'd introduce her to the actors and stuff, and that was fun.
Okay, I think we have a question in Ms. Beecher's class.
Miss
Yes.
Beecher, she
Hi.
owes me money. No, that's not.
We have 2 questions. The first one comes from Emily.
Hi, Emily.
Hi, from all the books you wrote, which one's your favorite?
Which one's my favorite? So that's an interesting question, Emily. Thank you. This may sound odd to you. I don't think of them as different books. I think of them all as one really long book. And people have heard of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. I have what I call the Pontiverse. I joke with my wife about it. And the Pontiverse is all these books exist in a world together. So I know they're separate and I know they're different, but it feels like I'm just getting better at extending the story. The first one's special because it's the first one that got published and what a big deal that was. That's Dead City. And Framed is special because Framed was the first one that started getting attention and winning awards, and that helped me get to write more of them. City Spies was the most popular. So they're all special and they mean a lot to me for different things. I will tell you my least favorite book is this one, and that's because this is the one that's giving me headaches right now. The second it's done, it will become my favorite book. It is without question the best written book that I've done. But so the least favorite is always the one that you're writing. Your most favorite, if you had to pick one, is probably the one you've most recently finished. And there was another question from Ms. Beecher's class, I think.
Yeah, so Claire?
Are there any characters that you base on real people or multiple people in your life?
Yeah, so all the characters are based on people, but they're not based on people the way when I was first starting writing, I would think that meant, which would be like, so your name's Claire, is that right? Like it's not, so it wouldn't be like, you know what, Claire's really great. I need a character like Claire. So I'm gonna have a character, but I'll name them Clay maybe, or Clarice, or I don't, but in my head, I would always think that was Claire. And I would not want bad things to happen to the character because that's like I'm having bad things happen to Claire. And I would not have them do bad things or make mistakes as much. And so the problem is when you base someone specifically on a character, you tend to exaggerate that person's personality, make them all good or all bad. For instance, I knew someone who worked at Nickelodeon that hated the Dallas Cowboys. So in every episode of every show he ever wrote for Nickelodeon, all the bad characters were named after Dallas Cowboys because he thought that would make kids hate the Cowboys without realizing why, right? So that was just his thing. What I find is like, okay, so Claire, I'm just going to guess Claire is creative. You strike me as a creative person. And I would say something about Claire's creativity, and that part I would give to one of my characters. But maybe Claire is also really funny, and I would give the funny part of Claire to someone else. And I start breaking them up. But the most important thing for a character is the problem, right? All books are about problems and solving problems. And every character has one main problem that if you think of the character as the car driving through the plot of the story, the problem is the fuel and the engine that makes the car go. The problems mostly come from me, my son, my wife, our family, things that I saw in middle school. They come from the core issues of middle school. And my problems are given to all the characters. So there's a little bit of me in all of them and a little bit of my friends and others in them as well.
Thank
And
you.
I know I'm right. I know you're creative and you're wondering how I know that, but I'm a detective, right? I write detective, I'm a spy. So I know how to tell these things. All right, our next question.
Oh, I think that might be Stella, if you want to come. I have some, we sent out a Google form to students before, so I have some from the
Wait,
Google form.
is that someone right? Oh yeah, go ahead. I'm sorry.
And then Stella's here too.
How long did it take you to get the thought process of writing the first book of City Spies?
How long did it take to get the thought process for writing for City Spies?
Like how long did you take in the brainstorming?
Yeah.
Yeah, so like how long was the brainstorming process, or kind of I think what is the process from like just getting started?
City Spies took like 20 minutes. I don't know how that happened. It was so quick. We went to the store, we went to the mall, my wife and I, and she wanted to go to Macy's and try on clothes. And I wanted to be anywhere but Macy's, standing outside the dressing room, holding her purse, like this, right? And so we entered the mall through the Barnes and Noble, and I said, why don't I stay here? And you go to Macy's, and she goes, why, are you looking for a book? And I said, no, I want to come up with a new book series. I was kind of joking. And this is just after we got off that trip to Europe. And she goes, what? And she goes, well, you know, we just spent a lot of money, and I got to make some money somehow. And so I'm going to write a new book series. And she goes, okay. And she left, and I stood there by the kids section, and I looked at the books, and I asked myself what was missing. And for me, brainstorming is about questions. And you ask yourself a question, and the answer to that question is a bigger question. And the answer to that question is a bigger question. And eventually you ask yourself a question that can only be answered in 300 pages, right? And so I'm asking myself, what's missing from these book covers? And I looked and I saw this one is, who was Albert Einstein? And this one is, who is Jimmy Carter? And who is this? And then, so there's a lot of ones with famous people on the faces on the cover. And then I looked over at these, and it's like, I survived Titanic. I survived Valley Forge. And it's like, okay, so there's famous events. So I got people, I got events. But the thing I really wanted, I started thinking about that trip and the picture of my wife and son in front of the Eiffel Tower. Like, wouldn't it be, you know, the cover, because we say don't judge a book by its cover, but we all judge books by their covers, right? And I look and I go, I want a cover that tells you instantly, oh, you're going on a great adventure. So it has like the Eiffel Tower on one, and the next one can have the Big Ben, and the next one can have the Golden Gate Bridge or the Sydney Opera House or whatever. So I have a book where you travel around the world, because this trip we just took was so much fun, and it was so much fun to travel to different countries. And so then the questions are, well, who travels around the world? Well, okay, a spy does. Okay, so spies travel around the world. Okay, so, well, why? Why are the spies kids though? And oh, it's a family of spy, you know. And so I just kept answering these questions. And the big thing, the big part of that 20 minutes was when I went with my mom to see a movie called Dead Poets Society back in the 90s or 80s or whenever it came out. And you guys wouldn't know the movie, it's before your time, but it's about these kids in a prep school. And my mom struggled so much in the movie because she said, I can't tell them apart because they all wore the same uniform for the school, and they all had basically the same haircut, and none of them were famous actors, and my mom could not remember which kid was which. And that always stuck with me as a writer, of like how frustrating it is if the reader doesn't know who's who. And so I thought, I hate that in a book when it's like Thomas did this, and I haven't heard Thomas's name for 3 chapters, and I forget which one he is. So I thought, this is what I'll do. They'll use the cities that they're from as their code names, and that way we'll instantly know who it is. Because Paris is the one from France, and when you remember that, you remember everything about Paris. And Sydney's the one from Australia, and you remember that. And then my wife came back from Macy's, and we walk out to the car, and she said, so did you do it? Did you come up with a book idea, book series? I said, you won't believe it, but I think I did. And she goes, what? I go, yeah, I think I did. And we got in the car. She goes, what is it? I go, it's about these kids who are spies. They're from all over. I don't know why they're from all over yet. I haven't figured that part out. But they're kids from all over. And they use the cities that they're from as code names, right? And I don't know, they're probably called like the city spies. That was it. 20 minutes. And I had most of the basic idea. And then I went back and I started fleshing it out, and I came up with the opening chapter. And that's when I knew I loved it. And the opening chapter is with the girl who becomes Brooklyn. She is going to go to jail for hacking into the computer of foster care in New York, right? And so I'm with my editor and publisher about a month later at a convention for librarians, and we're walking down the hall. I'm walking down the hall with my publisher, and I said, "Okay, I know Framed hadn't even come out yet. Framed was this whole new series we're all excited about." I said, "I know we're all excited about Framed right now, but you want to hear the next book that we're going to do, the next series?" And she said, "Sure." And I described the first scene about there's this girl and she has this lawyer who says she's going to jail for 3 years, and then this new lawyer comes in and tells the other one that he's been hired to represent her, and And he sits down across from her and he says, is it true that you hacked into the computer system for the juvenile justice system? And she doesn't want to answer because she doesn't know this guy. And he's like, I'm your lawyer. You can tell me anything. And she goes, yes, it's true. And he pulls a computer out of his briefcase and says, I need you to do it again. And that's all I told her. And she said, oh, that's good. And we were talking about something else. And she says, and pretty soon we're going to get you on the New York Times bestseller list. And 3 years later, she's the one who called me on the phone on a Wednesday night about that book that had just come out that week to say, guess what, James? You're on the New York Times bestseller list. So it went from that 20-minute session to that 5-minute conversation to we're now at 1,200 pages and counting between the 3 books. So, okay. Long answer. I'm very sorry.
Well, what advice do you have for young aspiring authors?
Well, the biggest advice I would say is only write about things that matter to you. Now, you have to do your homework. I'm not saying don't do that. But if you want to write, you write about things that matter. Don't write about things that you think. So if you're into fan fiction and you want to, that's great. If that matters to you, write that. Write about things that matter to you and then write it in the way that you talk. And I think that's a real important thing that we lose. A lot of people, now you want the different characters to talk differently, but you want the voice of the book to be your voice. And a lot of people think when you're writing, oh, I got to get a thesaurus out in the dictionary, I got to use big, long words. And, well, when you consider anti-disestablishmentarianism or something, some will say, no, people don't talk that way. People don't want to read that. So the biggest trick that I have in writing is, and maybe it's because I come from writing scripts, which are mostly dialogue. I read everything I write out loud. And only when I hear it do I know if it's good or not. Because only when I hear it can I hear what it really is, that it has the right voice. So I would say write about what matters to you, write about it in the way that you talk, and then you have already the incredible personal story. That's your story. Even if it's a silly story about knights traveling through time and dragons and unicorns or whatever it is, it doesn't matter if it matters to you. And then the next part is, and this is the part you hate, when you trust the people, whether it's your teacher, your friend, listen to what they say and make the story better and rewrite it and edit it and fix it. And, I go through that. I've written a lot of books and I still have to go through that. And I get my paper back and it's all covered in red ink about what we're going to change, so things you care about, your voice, realizing that the key to it is going to be the rewriting, not the first time through. And we are pretty much out of time, I think, aren't we? Thank you guys so much. I hope you could hear okay. I hope I didn't bore you too much. It's hard to tell when we can't be in person. So, but I really appreciate you taking the time to spend with me today. I really appreciate the Savannah Book Festival for putting this together and getting a grant to get you guys books. And I hope you like them. And you can always, I have a website, jamesponti.com. You can write to me on that if you have questions. We're not going to become like, it's not good for grown-ups and kids to write back and forth a bunch, but if you have a question, ask someone and, I'll answer that, or follow on Twitter or something. I don't do TikTok yet, but even if you don't like me or my writing, that's totally all right. But there are books out there that you would love. Don't be like me and think that reading is hard or boring or dull and not do it. I was such a stupid mistake on my part. Find the books. They could be graphic novels, they could be nonfiction, it could be Sports Illustrated, it could be Skateboarder Magazine, it could be whatever. Find the things that you like and really read them, and that will just help you grow as a reader, as a writer, as a human being. So thank you guys so very much. And then the very last thing, I'm just going to keep talking because I guess they can cut me off. Mr. Prothero changed my life, and 40 years later, I went and I found and told him that. It's hard to find your teachers 40 years later. You guys have just gone through the worst school year in the history of mankind. There's without a doubt, this is the worst. And you guys have been amazing. The students have been amazing in putting up with all this stuff. The teachers have been amazing. I'm married to a teacher. It is so hard to do. It is also so hard to find your teacher 40 years later to say thanks. Make sure in these last weeks of school that you show your teachers that you appreciate what they've done. Because you're going to figure out in 5 years, and 10 years, and 20 years, that not only do you appreciate it, that they have done nothing more than to help give you the tools to succeed in life. So thank them for it. And I thank you all for your time. Thank you
And
guys.
we thank you too. Thank you so very much. And I hope all the students enjoy reading City Spies if they haven't read it already.
I hope so too. But if not, it's too late. You already have the book. Ha ha ha. So you can give it to someone else. No, I really do hope you like it. All right. You guys have a great day today.
You too. Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye.
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 It's clear.